This case completely changed how America thinks about safety. A quiet town, college students, a rented house, and 4 brutal murders in a single night. Bryan Kohberger, a criminology PhD student. Now he's pleading guilty, but the victims' families are furious. This is Fame Alert, and we're going to show you what justice looks like under the microscope. Bryan Kohberger is 30 years old. He studied the minds of killers. He was enrolled at Washington State University and, ironically, training for a career in law enforcement. But in the fall of 2022, he became the main suspect in one of the most shocking killings of the decade. November 13th, Moscow, Idaho. That morning, police discovered the bodies of 4 students: Kaylee Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. They were stabbed to death while sleeping. Some of them had fought back. Maddie and Kaylee were sleeping in the same bed. Ethan was staying over at Xana's. He died next to her. 2 other roommates survived. They heard someone walking through the house, but were too scared to check. They had no idea that behind the door stood a man with a knife. At the scene, police recovered a knife sheath. On the button snap, DNA, later confirmed to be Kohberger's. Phone records, surveillance footage, and vehicle data placed him at the crime scene, before, during, and after the murders.
Looking through the history of this case shows that the defense has met challenges and difficulties along the way, but has been dedicated in meeting all of the deadlines. We have talked about discovery issues in this courtroom before, and that in large part brings us to need a continuance. 68 terabytes of information is a huge amount of information. There have been 23 requests for additional discovery over the span of 2.5 years, and 7 motions to compel. When I say that this doesn't come as a surprise, that this comes from the record, I would direct the court to look back to May of 2023 and June of 2023, and our second motion to compel. Included in that was what was known as Exhibit A from the defense, and that depicted how we were receiving discovery. So this is not a new issue. This is something that's been coming up for a long time. We were receiving discovery, but it was such that you would get a file that would say hundreds of photographs, hundreds of pages of reports, each having to be looked at individually to know what was there and then organized.
A white Hyundai Elantra was caught circling the neighborhood multiple times, and after nearly 7 weeks of surveillance, Kohberger was arrested. He was taken into custody on December 30th, 2022, in Pennsylvania at his parents' home. His father was with him. They were driving the same car caught on tape the night of the murders. Bryan didn't resist. In handcuffs, he stayed silent.
Everything that happens in this case continues to be talked about, and this court has a duty, a responsibility to make sure that Mr. Kohberger receives a fair trial. That comes from Shepard versus Maxwell, 384 U.S. 333. And a continuance may be the way that the court can best protect Mr. Kohberger. That comes from Patton versus Yount, 467 U.S. 1025. In addition to what is going on with what happened with the Dateline episode, that's not all. There's a book set to be released just a few weeks from now to be followed by a docuseries on Amazon Prime. There's a claim that there's inside sources that provide information in this case. At the very least, the moment we start attempting to select a jury in this case, those things are going to be on everybody's TV, everybody's social media feed, and some of the very witnesses that will be expected to testify will be taking part in the docuseries at least, and maybe noted in the book. That is, in and of itself, an exceptional reason for us to have a continuance to let those things play out for a while.
Later in court, he would plead not guilty. The investigation was massive, 68 terabytes of data. His defense attorney...
We have a life history for the defendant. The defense has amassed significant materials, and I thought we were going to be solely talking about the mitigation case that still needs to be developed. That is not a basis for a continuance. And to the extent there are ongoing discovery from the state that Ms. Taylor alluded to, I can represent that most of what was just turned over was our investigators speaking with witnesses that the defense has disclosed. So that's the nature of that discovery, is us responding. As Ms. Taylor said, people will continue to talk about this case. The issue is whether the court, using the procedures it has established, or maybe even modifying them as the court wants to, can seat a panel of impartial jurors. The Supreme Court of Idaho has found that despite widespread publicity, even on the day of jury selection, that is possible. That is possible in this case, despite the challenges. The other thing I would mention with respect to the publicity is that it puts us at the whim of the media. Every time there's a breaking story, every time there's a new book or a new documentary, are we going to continue the trial indefinitely? And that seems to be the danger in what the defense is asking for. We call it a perpetual continuance, and we haven't seen a proposal about when this trial could take place if there's a continuance. What seems to be the strategy here is just to delay. And that leads me to, I think, the other point that Ms. Taylor raised, which was to say that this shouldn't be a surprise. It is a surprise to us that a motion to continue was made so late in the game.
And Taylor argued they weren't ready for trial. Too much evidence, too little time. She blamed media pressure, leaks, and upcoming documentaries. Amazon was dropping a series, Dateline was airing an episode. And in them, search history, Ted Bundy, violent fantasies involving women asleep, selfies dressed in black, matching descriptions from a surviving roommate, photos of the victim's friends. It was a media storm. Then the families found out that Kohberger was planning to take a plea deal. The family of Kaylee Goncalves made a public statement. "We are beyond furious. This is betrayal. The deal? He pleads guilty and avoids the death penalty. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. For some, that's closure. But not for everyone." Kohberger's team also tried to shift the focus. They named 4 alternate suspects, people who knew the victims. But all 4 cooperated, gave DNA samples, handed over their phones. There was no link, no connection. The court refused the motion. You didn't show any real ties to the crime. To the judge, it looked more like a distraction tactic. And yet, the biggest question remains unanswered. Why? Kohberger had no personal relationship with the victims. But investigators say he had been near their home over a dozen times before the murders. Was he watching them? Planning? No one knows. And maybe no one ever will. The court wasn't buying the delays. Every argument from the defense was reviewed and denied. The judge said, "You didn't prove you were unprepared. You're just stalling. That won't fly." The trial is set for August. But this is no longer a question of guilt. It's about what happens when the criminal justice system is forced to confront itself. How a man who studied evil became its face. How a courtroom becomes the final battlefield. Not just for law, but for truth. Fame Alert will be following this case closely, because justice isn't just about a verdict, it's about telling the truth at the right time. Subscribe, share, and remember, evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it sits one row behind you in class.